I want to let each of our panelists do a brief 1-minute introduction about themselves. So Nidhi, please, if you would start.
Sure. My name is Nicolas. Gosh, I'm still reeling from Michael's talk. It was just amazing. My name is Nicolas. I run technology, all things technology at Hired. If you haven't heard of Hired, let me just give you a quick preview. Hired is a marketplace that connects top talent, people like such as yourselves, with the world's most innovative companies. What that means for everybody in the audience is if you're looking to connect with employers, that will be the platform for you. Coming for this panel, I was sort of thinking, why is diversity important to me? I couldn't come up with an answer. The only thing I could come up with, diversity is not a woman issue or a black issue or a whatever issue. It's a human issue. So we should be talking about it in that context. So that's the reason why I'm here today and I'm excited to be talking about it.
Great, Nidhi. Thank you. Shivani?
Hi, I'm Shivani Sharma. I'm a senior manager at Slack, and I currently lead the user experience team. So we've had a lot of organic growth of Slack with the developer community in the first couple of years of Slack, and now my team is tasked with showing the value of Slack to other types of knowledge workers and other non-developer technical roles. So that's the big thing I'm doing. I think it was nice that you talked about the diversity aspect. I think for me, I've been in tech for over 10 years, and Slack has been the most diverse and inclusive environment that I've worked in. And I didn't realize what I was missing out on all of these years. I kind of just went with the status quo. I tried to ignore and just fit in wherever I was. So it's really great that these past few years, it's been more openly talked about. And now being in a leadership position, I have the power to make change in people's lives as well. And so that's what I really enjoy about my work.
Great try. Nick?
Hi. My name is Nick Caldwell. I'm VP of Engineering at Reddit. Reddit, if I had to describe it succinctly, Reddit is a site where 320 million people come per month. We show them cat pictures, and they vote on the ones that they like. I think that's the simplest way to describe it. You should try it if you haven't checked it out. Diversity is an important issue for me. I used to work in Seattle before I got this VP gig at Reddit. I was at Microsoft for 13 years. For those of you who live in Seattle, you'll agree with me, but there's actually no black people in Seattle. So one of the cool things that happened, I know Michael isn't a fan of San Francisco, but I kind of enjoyed seeing other people like me to a little bit of extent. And it gave me some hope that we might be able to, I personally might be able to get involved in improving diversity in tech. So I've been doing that a lot. I've been participating in any Dev Color people in here? There we go, shout out. Join Dev Color tonight, you have to be black. I started my own charity, and then I love doing events like this where I can kind of help shed light on what we're doing about development.
Excellent. And thank you, and I'm really, obviously I'm honored to actually be moderating this panel tonight in front of all of you guests as well. My name is Krishna. I'm the SVP of Engineering at GTL, our company Telmate was recently acquired. I run large engineering teams sort of throughout the world. I also run a podcast that's focused on improving the craft of engineering leadership. It's called Simple Leadership. I've actually interviewed two of you, and I'd love to get you on someday. We'll talk about it later. First, I want to start off with some facts here. I think, just to let everybody know, according to LinkedIn research, there's only 28% of software engineers today are women, right? And that number has only gone up 3% over the last 15 years. Even worse, women in leadership roles have only gone up 2.3%. If you talk about Asian women, it's 4%, African American, 2%, and most underrepresented group of women in tech is Latino, which is about 1.5%, right? And I think that's setting the stage a little bit. That's one particular group, but it shows that we have a lot of room to grow and a lot of improvement to go for. One of the things I want to bring up, though, for people yell out here is, what are the groups everyone thinks here are underrepresented groups? What are the groups that you consider that can be and are potentially discriminated enough or not represented well in engineering or any environments? Anyone? What?
Black women.
Black women, right? Color, gender, yeah?
Disabled.
Disabled people, absolutely. Anyone else? Age discrimination, right? I'm above that 40-year-old mark now, which is ageism, right? In tech, it's actually a thing. Okay, anyone else? Trans, right? Absolutely. Anyone? Education level, right? Discriminating against having that degree from Stanford, right? Anyone else? Right, so let me go through some of the lists here too. So we've talked about ancestry, national origin, religion, right, is another aspect. Pregnancy, are you pregnant? Do you have children at home? Medical conditions, mental health, people with HIV or AIDS, disability we mentioned, mental or physical, genetic, marital status, do you have children, military or veteran status, political affiliations, okay, status of domestic violence, assault or stalking, or even the case of extreme introversion, right? I think that can actually put people at a severe disadvantage, especially when it comes to self-advocacy, which is something I think we're definitely going to talk about. At first, I think I want to talk about, when we first talked about this, I want to talk about, is there even a debate that diversity is good, right? And I think no, right? That debate is long done, okay? Racially diverse startup teams generate 35% higher financial returns according to peers, according to McKinsey. Women-led startups generate 15% higher financial returns than those run exclusively by men. Diverse teams help deliver more compelling product, have more market share, and really, they're just more fulfilling to work at, right? So I think we don't have to have a discussion about whether that's a good thing or not. It is, right? Like that's done. So many of you here in the audience are not founders or CEOs, right? But some of you are managers or tech leads. So how can you still make an impact? Because you can. And I think it's not just about focusing on hiring a more diverse workforce, but fostering a safe, inclusive work environment, right? The most successful diversity efforts often don't start with hiring, they start with inclusion. The panel later today will talk about hiring, and this panel really is going to focus on how do we foster a more inclusive work environment, for our employees that we also want to work at. So the first question for the panel, it's hard to know where you stand and track progress without data, right? I want to know, raise your hand in the audience, does anyone in the audience know, and in the panel, do you know your diversity statistics at your company? Does anyone know? So that's a pretty decent percentage, right? Does any of your companies publish that data publicly and externally? A smaller amount, right? So, Shivani, your company does Slack. I know they're very progressive, right? What do you think about that? Because some people, right, they think if it's bad, they don't want to publish it. What are your thoughts on should a company publish it or not?
I think companies should publish it to show, I think by publishing it, you can show that you are a place that is actually making efforts towards it. You can share progress from year to year as well. And by seeing that, if I know that, hey, there are 30% women engineering managers at company X, hey, maybe there's other people like me that maybe I will have the support and have folks that I can connect with and actually apply there. So I think it's a way for folks to identify with, even if the numbers are still being worked on, because it's never enough, there's still a way to see someone in yourself in those companies.
And say, what about a company that's maybe you want to really try to improve it, but your numbers don't look so good, right?
I think it's still important, right? I mean, I think diversity, it's not a problem we solve overnight. It's not a problem that's going to get solved in my generation for sure. So I think in many ways showing these stats is sort of holding up a mirror to say, yes, we care deeply about this issue, but we're far from perfect. So Hyatt actually publishes two separate data sources. One is our internal diversity metrics. In addition to that, we also publish our internal wage gap metrics. We also publish, because wage gap is an important issue as we talk about diversity. So, and Hyatt is a platform that takes a candidate, that knows a candidate's journey through the entire hiring process. So we publish our data, both of these data reports, not just for ourselves internally, but we also show the mirror to the industry in terms of what we see on the platform and what we're seeing in the industry. And I think it's important to be vulnerable on this issue. I don't expect anybody to have perfect stats. I don't expect anybody to say, yes, this is what a perfect mix looks like, because we wouldn't be here talking about this issue if that were the case.
Yep, exactly. I mean, one thing I want to talk about too is, according to statistics, most people have a manager that is probably not a member of an underrepresented group. Okay, so Nick, let's start with you. What are some advice that you would give to a tech lead or a manager who is not a member of an underrepresented group to help with fostering inclusion? What would you? Oh, the instance, right? What are some of the things that you would tips to give to a manager who is not a member of an underrepresented group to help to start fostering inclusion and diversity in that group?
Oh, got it. Okay, I think the first thing that I give a manager who's not a member of an underrepresented group who works for me is that caring about this issue is important to me. We're going to take that as our starting point and go from there because there's many other places to work. But the advice I would give them in terms of fostering inclusion is one, like I'm serious. You do have to tell people you care about it. Like I remember the first couple of weeks at Reddit, it was very, very important that as I hired managers, that I expressed to them how important this was going to be to me personally, and to the women that we had on the team in particular. We don't publish our stats publicly yet. I'm looking forward to doing that. But I made it very, very clear internally that there were metrics that we were going to move. So I think first making it clear that you're going to continue to make this an issue until it's solved is where you start. The second thing in terms of, just more, once you kind of get underway, I tell managers that people who are in underrepresented groups, they're going to naturally feel excluded until the hiring problems get solved and so forth and so on. So you need to be conscious of what they're thinking and whether or not their issues are being included. I think the biggest challenges where this happens tend to be honestly around things like, I know it's mundane, but it's like morale events. I give like new managers tips. When you're planning a morale event, don't assume that everybody drinks, for religious reasons. And then, there's many other examples like that. And then the other place where it comes up is when you're talking to your team, that you think about, you empathize, or you think about how what you're saying is going to be interpreted by different groups and different ways of thinking. I think that the final thing I would say is when you're building product, it matters a lot. That if you're going to have, there's no point in having like a diverse and inclusive team if you don't think about ways to involve them in product decisions. And without being blunt, I try and make sure that managers make sure that if they know that there's a diverse opinion on their team, they find ways to pull it out. That doesn't mean like, hey Nick, you're the one black guy in the room, but there's more subtle ways to do that. And I think you end up building better products if you learn to leverage the unique strengths of people on your team.
Sure. Shivani, what do you?
So I haven't managed many managers quite yet, but I can talk about how I do it as a manager. I've switched teams a couple times at Slack, and it's, like I said earlier, it's the most diverse place that I've worked, sliced and diced across many of the categories that you already talked about, Christian. And I make sure that I get to know the people on my team. I think building that trust, building that mutual respect, understanding where people are coming from, that means getting to know them on a human level, because their culture, their background, all of the things that make everyone diverse in their own way, is the lens in which they view the world and how the perspective that they bring to the workplace. So that's part one. Part two, what I tactically do also is that I was noticing that the more dominant groups of people at our company, that how do I get everyone contributing to discussions? And so I've actually tried different brainstorming techniques where people who think fast or think slower and need more processing time versus people who just shout things out, or folks that are more shy, like just incorporating the different working styles and trying different brainstorming techniques so that everyone feels like they can contribute to these product ideas, which Nick mentioned. So those are a couple of tactical things that I do, and that's worked really well to actually build a good team gel and contribution, and my current team is very happy and healthy and very proud of that.
Excellent. Nidhi.
I want to double click on something that Nick said. I think values fit is very important. And oftentimes, at least in days of the past, it used to be referred to as culture fit. And culture fit used to be, can I have drinks with this person? And if the answer is yes, then great, let's hire this person, right? I think values fit is way more important. And yes, there are plenty of jobs in the Valley, to the point that you made, that the conversation of whether we need diverse teams or not is over. When you're interviewing, you're at a company, you are equally empowered as the hiring manager. So I think it's important to remember that, we recognize that. And you should be exploring the values of the company. If the values of the company are like Slack or higher, that actually truly value diversity and put their money where their mouth is, then go join that company. If it isn't, then conversation over. Life is too short, there's plenty of other opportunities, go somewhere else. And same thing from a hiring manager standpoint, one of the things we do at Hired is actually do a values review. We make sure that the people, we strongly believe in diversity. We want to make sure that the people we're bringing into the organization share our values, otherwise we're not a good fit.
And I think the nomenclature is important too. And I know Atlassian made a big shift recently from going from culture to values, right? And I think you're right. It's really the culture fit is, you have beers at first, and values is our core values aligned with the company and where they're going, right? How many people in the audience have done formal diversity training? Anyone? Yeah, so a decent amount. What's your view, Nick? Formal diversity training, is that something that you think is valuable for employees and managers and companies?
I do think it's valuable. I don't know that, I think you made a really good point about culture. I think diversity training insofar as, you rattled off the list earlier on of all the different ways that people can be considered underrepresented group. I cannot remember that off the top of my head to save my life. And I think having like a refresher course on that every once in a while is really, really valuable. The other thing that I think is really, valuable that kind of gets included in D&I training tends to be more about how you communicate with people who are different. Learning how to talk to introverts, for example, for me was a big move. And then another one that comes up, which is really valuable as you get kind of higher in your career, is sometimes you have to deal with cultures that are just fundamentally different. Like you have to manage remote teams. And to me, like thinking about D&I, it wraps all that in. And those are really, really valuable things. That said, going back to the earlier point about culture, there's kind of a fundamental thing about diversity that I've come to believe since my time in Silicon Valley, which is I get to see all of the opportunity we have here. This place just generates opportunity is insane to me, and the idea that a place on the planet has more opportunity, more wealth creation than any other place, and it's not fairly distributed. To me, that's like ridiculous, and you don't need to be trained sometimes for right and wrong. Like I think sometimes training masks a more fundamental thing, which is like, do you have empathy, yes or no? And I don't know if there's training for that, but I do support training.
Yeah. So what I want to kind of talk about is, if we want to improve diversity, right, we need to promote and make more members of underrepresented groups into leadership positions in companies, right? So that goes into the whole promotion practices inside of companies. And the problem with promotion practices today is they tend to be, they promote the people who are very self-promoting, right? They tend to skew towards that. So how do you help to promote self-advocacy for members of underrepresented groups to help them on their career path, to help them get into higher level positions in companies?
That's a great question. I personally fundamentally believe that if you have to self-advocate to be promoted, then that's not the right organization for you. Every organization, so we at Hire do this both from an interview process standpoint as well as from a promotion standpoint. There is very clearly articulated career ladder. There's very clearly articulated criteria in terms of what you ought to achieve in order to get to the next level. And I think that removes a lot of subjectivity and ambiguity. what we also do is that we create individualized growth plans. So every single engineer and every single individual at the company has a growth plan which maps to where they're at, to where they need to get to, assuming that's where they want to get to.
Sure.
And what the gap is and what they need to do to get there. And I think if you take all of these steps, one, you're investing in your employees, and second, you're leaving no room for ambiguity. I think to go back to the self-advocacy point that you made, that is a big issue, especially I speak for women, who are, many women are introverts. And I'll give you an example from my organization today, where we had a calibration discussion when it came time for promotion, and one of them was up for promotion, and she's an introvert. So several engineering managers across the room, they're like, well, we really haven't seen much from her. And then we have to challenge each other to say, have you not seen enough from her, or have you not seen enough because she hasn't spoken up in public meetings? And I think it's important to have that distinction and tying that back to the definition that you have. And if you have a definition, you can go back to that document and refer to it in order to make sure that there's parity in terms of the decisions you're making.
Making it very clear about what's responsible for Shivani.
Yeah, so let's see, in the past 6 months, I've promoted 6 people out of the 8 people on my team, so I've been very involved with the promotion processes in the last 2 cycles. The things that I do for my team are to build growth plans with each of them. So I look at what they're aspiring to, whether they want to be a technical lead manager and want to move into management, or whether they just want to move up the technical path and go from a senior engineer to a staff engineer, which is a big jump, and there's a lot of responsibility there. I think what's really great about our particular career path is that you can demonstrate leadership and strategic alignment and communication in different ways. So folks that aren't the type that are going to do internal tech talks and be the loud, funny presentation person, but also share great technical content. Not everyone's like that. We do have some people that are very good at that in the company and are very visible. But there are other ways. It's mentoring people in small working groups, writing excellent documentation and sharing that with your functional area, whether you're a staff backend engineer, and sharing that with the rest of the backend engineer, all the other backend engineers in the company. It's leading design discussions. So depending on what the individual is comfortable with, I try to curate a plan that still aligns with their career path for them to leverage their strengths instead of trying to improve what they view they're not good at or don't want to do.
Sure. I want to get to 2 sort of more points before the time runs out today, and talk about pay, because that's always something that I think is very much in the news, and it's a core part of having an inclusive environment. And Glassdoor today reports that women in computer programming make 70 cents per dollar that men earn, and the Hispanic and African American men make about 80 cents on the dollar, right, for the same employee. So Nick, for you, what do you think is important to be done to ensure equitable compensation at companies?
I can tell you what Reddit does, which I to my knowledge, is the most equitable form of this I'm aware of. Reddit has 2 things, which one is a no negotiation policy. And if you get an offer at Reddit, that is an offer. There is no period, end of story. This is how much we're going to give you. And I think that the literature suggests that women are at a disadvantage if you don't have a policy like that in place. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing is our salary is directly mapped to the job letter. Again, period, end of story. So
salary bands.
Yeah, salary bands are your salary will be identical. If you know somebody's level, you know exactly how much they make. So there's no wiggle room for negotiation or bias. Everyone at the same ladder is being paid the same amount. And I think the way there are additional things that we do to make sure that people are at the same, at the right ladder band.
Mm-hmm. One other quick thing I want to talk about. So, about 40% of women in tech end up leaving their technology and STEM jobs at some point in their careers. So, for you, one of them is big family support, right? So how can companies really help support women to kind of stay in a career and not sort of drop out?
I have an interesting story. So I had my daughter 8 years ago, and I took a break. And after I came back, I started to interview. I went to talk to some of these search firms, and most of the search firms said, "We are shocked that you're coming back." It's pathetic. It's really pathetic. So some of the things that we do at Hive that I think are very effective. Michael mentioned this earlier. Don't just go out for drinks. Do other fun events. I think, sorry, Nick, you mentioned it earlier. I think there's there are other things like paternity policy. So paternity policy should be equal to maternity policies. When you have a child, the couple has a child, not just the woman. There should be family leaves. There should be equal and reasonable accommodation, regardless of your gender, at an organization, to support parents. Second is third is just make sure that it's an inclusive workplace. We support working from home. There are flexible work hours as long as you're getting your work done. My daughter has spring break 2 weeks from now, so I'm going to work from home half the time, and that's okay. I think creating more flexibility is going to enable you to create a more inclusive and diverse workplace.
Shivani, any comments?
I agree on paternity policies being equal. At Slack, we have a lot of folks that are in their young family stage, so I feel like there's a lot of folks going on maternity and paternity. I think also being equal is important because you can also have same-sex couples, and both could be male, and they could also have adopted a child. So I think that's also an aspect of inclusivity that's important that I've seen. And I don't have any children yet, but the fact that Slack is supportive, all of us managers cover the teams and the projects for the other folks that are going on paternity and maternity leave. I covered for one of the engineering directors on our international project last summer for 2 months while she was out, and I think we're kind of like a family, and we help each other out so that things are running smoothly and they don't have to worry, and when they come back they can pick up where they left off. So I hope to be able to have a family and have that flexibility and still be at Slack when that happens.
Excellent. So I think now we're kind of up to the point of audience questions. So if anyone wants to raise their hand or if it's on Slido, does anyone have any questions for kind of the panelists we have here today? Are we doing Slido, Juan? Oh yes, okay. Let's see.
Pick the questions.
When should you start focusing on diversity in early stage when resources are scarce? Let's say, Nick, let's start with you.
So at Reddit, when I showed up, there was only 30 engineers, and we started focusing on diversity day one. So I want to give like a real answer. I mean, as soon as possible is the right answer, and that is probably going to be after you get your first customer. Like there's a point at your startup where you need to survive and get traction. That very, very early phase. And I would say immediately after you get traction, I would start focusing on or making diversity a part of your hiring plan. Because what you don't want to get into is a situation like Michael was talking about earlier, where you've hired 300 people and now you care about diversity. That is a really difficult problem to solve after the fact. But at Reddit, I wish I could share numbers with you guys and talk about what we've done. But if you get it while you're growing, it is definitely like a tractable problem, and I think you should do that as quickly as you can.
To just add to that, I think you just quoted several studies that have shown greater returns. So if you really want your startup to have a successful outcome, the more diverse your teams, the higher the likelihood of your startup actually succeeding. So diversity should not be an issue in my mind. Diversity should not be an issue that's something that you get later too. All of the forms of diversity that we just talked about, what are they promoting? They're ultimately promoting diversity of thought. You want to make sure that there's diversity of thought because you want to reach out. You want your product to reach out to a far greater audience than you yourself can dream of. So I'd say start ASAP.
Great.
So one thing I'd say is that with an early stage startup, if you've got dreams to hit the international market and you want to have that $1 billion story, that is a diverse market. You know, the cultural differences. I've done internationalization at 2 companies, and the way that people work in Japan and the way people work in India are very different the way we work here. So if you have representation from all of these different cultures, you're going to be able to more cheaply incorporate that into your product instead of productionizing something, doing user research, getting feedback. It's a lot more expensive to do it after the fact.
Absolutely. Great points, Shivani. Next question here. As a women worker, what efforts can I make to feel included in a group with whom I don't share interests around non-work related stuff? Right? You mentioned a little bit about, you know, it's not going to be beers after work, right?
Am I allowed to answer this?
I was pointing at that you mentioned that.
I mean, I can take a stab at it, but I was hoping that.
Okay, Shivani.
Something maybe could go first. Gosh, this is a tough one. I think, Shivani mentioned this earlier. I think I sort of made the same mistake for the longest time in my career, where I just did whatever to fit in. I play a mean game of slap cup these days because that's how I learned. I would say be you. Right? That's why this conversation is happening. And be fortunate to be living in this era and not like 20 years ago when I entered the industry, or 15 years ago when I entered the industry, where this conversation was not happening. The reason why this conversation is happening and the reason why diversity is important is because we want for you to be you. So you don't have to fit in. Just be yourself. Just articulate and be your true being. And if you still feel that you're not accepted, if you can't speak your mind, then walk out the door and find someplace else. And there are plenty of places that will welcome you and allow you to be authentic, your own authentic, true self.
The other thing I would add on to that is, I can't answer the as a woman question. I think, you know, if you're building a company and you're building an organization, one thing you really want to try and do is just make sure that people have groups that they can identify, employee resource groups and so forth. Yeah. And that, like at Reddit, we have the company's only like 400 people. We have like 40 like interest groups, and these people are doing all sorts of different, like game night. Some people like are really into oysters. But the more you the more you foster that kind of thing, the easier it is for people to find their tribe, and then they'll feel included. They can find people that they have a good time with.
Yeah, and I want to definitely second that. I think the employee sort of resource groups and those tribes talk about make a huge difference to foster that kind of cross-cultural communication as well, and that bonding that happens. Right?
I was gonna say at Slack we have a channel for pretty much every interest group. And they're all public channels, so the exciting thing about being a new employee at Slack the first couple of weeks is that you're not immersed into the hurricane of all of the work that we're doing, and so you have time to start to find those people. And I also encourage all new hires, even folks that just meet around the office, to take that time to actually have coffees with people, say hello to people in the elevator, go to our happy hours, which we have every Thursday, and get that network of people early on. It's harder to do that later when you've kind of been set in your ways and your schedule at the company. So that's what I advise.
And there's a great, if any of you on the RAND sort of Slack channel, they have a great sort of Slack bot that if anyone says, hey guys, or any sort of specific gender things, they sort of say, hey, maybe you should reword that, right? Because it's not very friendly to both groups. Right? Next question. Do you adapt your hiring process for not computer science degrees and or not white men candidates? Do you train your HR team for that? Does anyone want to take that question?
I can take that. So one of the things that we do, not just from a hired as a company standpoint, but also from a platform standpoint, as we have employers on the platform, we guide them not to bias towards pedigree. The interesting data point, one of my best engineers on my team actually was a long-haul truck driver. he eventually made his way in his career to App Academy, and now he's one of my best engineers. You will find these hidden gems in non-traditional places. I think it's each of our responsibility to make sure that we don't bias towards pedigree. I know that as a filter, it's a powerful filter because we all as hiring managers want to be efficient, but there are platforms, I don't want to pitch Hired, but there are platforms like Hired, there are other platforms that do this, that do not bias towards degrees. And you don't want to bias towards degrees because if you keep biasing towards degrees, you will keep selecting that select group of individuals who were fortunate enough to get to a Stanford. I didn't go to a Stanford, and I think I'm doing pretty well. Yeah.
Anyone else want to take a step at this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one thing I think we do really well is we work with a lot of boot camps, and we don't. We look at boot camps as a source for a lot of different positions. Like some of our best managers are actually for boot camps, which is something that coming from my previous role, we didn't work a lot with boot camps. I was at Microsoft, and one thing I kind of love about the Bay Area is that you have this different form of pipeline. That it gives me hope that we can actually get a handle on this diversity problem. And groups like HackBright or Code 2040, we have them in our offices all the time. I think that's good for two reasons. When I talk to some larger companies about boot camps, I said, if you've ever actually had one in your office to understand the story that these folks will tell you, the fact that they have put so much effort into one career track and are simply trying to switch into another one. And I judge them on the basis of how much effort, energy they're able to put into it. And unless you meet these folks and empathize with them, it's hard to understand the value they get. That's been a big change for me over the past 2 years. But I think what we do really well is we integrate those boot camps into our hiring process really well.
We kind of wrap up with just a little anecdote. I had taken my daughter, I actually have 3 daughters, all getting into STEM, and I took one of them, my 11-year-old, to go see the Michael Jackson 1 Cirque du Soleil show. If you ever get to see it, it's a wonderful show. It's actually very inclusive too. It's pretty inspiring. But I asked her what her favorite part of that was and what her favorite song was, and she said, her favorite song was Man in the Mirror, right? Which is a great song. But I asked her why, and this is an 11-year-old saying, well, she realized that if you see something wrong, it's not going to change by itself. And you or someone else has to be the one to start that change. And I thought that was very kind of mature for an 11-year-old to have that. And I think that's kind of where we are today. You're all here in this room, and we are all up here because we see the fact that we want to make this a better place, and we want to change, and that really does start with us here. Right? So I want to thank everyone for my panel, and thank you all for coming